Hello, Herman.
Right. How are you, Ali?
I'm good, thanks. Welcome to Let's Be Frank. I've forgotten what episode we're on. 14?
Is this 13 or 14? I
Somewhere
can't
around there.
remember.
Um, so, today we're going to talk a little bit about a book that I recently finished reading. Herman has read it before. Uh, it's been on my list for a little while, but it was given some very controversial reviews on Goodreads. I think she is quite a Marmite author. It's you either love her or you hate her. And this is Ayn Rand, and the book was Atlas Shrugged. I have also ordered the one that you're reading or have just read, The Virtues of Selfishness.
Yeah.
That's arriving this week. But basically, Ayn Rand is an author who has her own life philosophy, which is objectivism. Um, it's quite anti socialism, um, which. So I was talking to someone the other day and asked if they'd read it, and she said, "Oh, is she the one who's very anti socialism?" No, I don't like that author. so, so she's very triggering and yeah, she has people giving quite strong opinions either in favor of or against what she stands for and believes in. Um, Atlas Shrugged is a novel. It's fiction, and it's set in. I actually don't know the year, but it's quite. It's an old setting. Can't think of
Yeah,
the,
I think
but
I think about the 1950s, or
something like that in
could
New
it even be, yeah.
set in New York. I can double check. I don't know if it actually ever mentions where. I mean, what the year is.
I
Um,
can't remember that it mentions the year.
yeah,
It may actually be older than 1950.
yeah. Um, I should have probably looked that up before we started. But basically, it's about the society and the New York industrial world and the working world, and it's obviously set in New York, which is like the hustle and bustle of the working world. Um, and suddenly, I don't want to give any spoilers, but some of the really key workers and the people who are contributing to society and owning businesses and employing people start disappearing. And it's interesting about how this affects the world, and it's focused on Danny Taggart, this woman who runs a railway corporation, and how she is fighting to keep the wheels turning and keep everything moving, with all of these major players kind of just disappearing unexpectedly, and um, kind of how the wheels start falling off. So yeah, I don't know. You've probably got a lot of questions for me about it and my thoughts on it, and we've mentioned it before in a few podcasts.
Yeah, so I just asked ChatGPT
Okay.
when this all played out, and it says that she didn't specify anyway. The book was released in 1957,
Mm.
so it was probably a little bit before that.
Yeah.
In terms of, if you think about the technology that was available, etc., the height of the railroads, when railroads was really important
Yeah.
to to a lot of things
Yes.
in America.
And definitely in
So
the book, they go from steam engines to starting to use more diesel engine trains. So it's that kind of era.
correct, correct, yeah.
Mm.
So, my first question is, wow, does this reflect the times that we live in or not? I
Yeah,
mean, some of the stuff that plays out in the novel.
yeah, very much. So, I mean, the point is that all of these people who are contributing to society and running these corporations in steel and oil and coal and all of kind of the supplementary parts to running a railroad, or um, a lot of there's a lot of mining, copper mining. Um, so all of these players who are contributing to society, they're all obviously wealthy people, mostly men because of the time, with the exception of Danny Taggart. um, but they they are seen as kind of the worst people by the society, by the government, um, because they seem to be benefiting unfairly, because they're wealthy people and they're a bit flashy, and so the government tries to make them pay for this privilege that they have of being wealthy. Um, so in taxes and in all these like legal things, they make them employ certain people. They're not allowed to do certain things. They can only have. At one point in the book, they implement a law where they can only run or own one business. So all these people who had started building additional businesses suddenly have to close their additional businesses. They're only allowed to own and run one single business. So it's kind of all these ways that the government and society is trying to stop these people from becoming wealthier or becoming more successful, and trying to make them share their wealth with people who are not as privileged as they are.
Yeah, so um, you could also say that they, you know, progressively there are more of these rules and regulations that are implemented to cover up the incompetencies or the inefficiencies of government and society.
Yeah.
And there's this sense of entitlement from those who are not as productive
Yeah.
as the business owners or the industrious people.
Yeah.
Although what they have built provides jobs to so many people, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And there's that disconnect in terms of the logic to understand that if it was not for men like them who built these massive businesses and these very profitable businesses,
Yeah.
that a hell of a lot of them would not have had jobs. And there's kind of that one part of the book where somebody tries to implement this phenomenal socialism um, in terms of the
Yeah, there's a motor business,
correct.
and uh, so basically I can't remember what happened, but the owner can no longer run the business, and so he's one of the men who disappears, I think, and so it gets
Yes,
left to his children, and they have no idea about running a motor
correct.
business, and they think that the best thing to do for humanity and for society and for all the people is to, regardless of the effort that is put in by the employees, they pay people according to their needs. So the
Correct. And
people who
not their worth.
need, yeah, people who need more because they have a sick grandma, or their child needs certain medication, or whatever. So according to what their need is as an individual, they would get paid more than, say, someone who does 90% of the work but doesn't need as much income to survive because they don't have any sick grandmas or children who need specific medication. And so they tried to distribute the wealth like that among their employees, and it caused chaos.
Yeah, it obviously causes chaos because who makes those decisions
Yeah.
first of all, and and secondly the obvious gaming of the system
Yeah.
in terms of justifying my needs so that I can get more
But it also means
without
that,
having to do more.
yeah, it also means that the hard workers will stop working as hard because they're not getting compensated fairly for the work that they're doing if they don't have the sick family members and whatever else people decide is a reason that you need more than someone else. So then you end up with output that is not as high or good because your hard workers are working at the same level as all of your basic workers.
Correct, because it doesn't make sense
Yeah,
to make a bigger contribution. Um, and, you know, again, don't you feel like you see so much of this playing out around you? You just pick up a newspaper or switch on a television set or open a website, and you see more and more examples of this
yeah,
happening 100 years later.
yeah,
Why are we not why are we not learning the lessons? Or why are some of us not learning the lessons?
yeah. So I think it's also important to note that what happens with all of the kind of government influence and input in how business should be run in the book is that they can't effectively run like that and they can't grow like that. And so they end up having to go out of business, and all of the people who they were employing no longer have jobs. And there's just this knock on effect of, by trying to take the wealth away from the productive, industrious people, you're actually taking the wealth away from the least of these, like the people who really need
Correct.
it, that you're trying to help with all of these regulations and laws and taxes. And yeah, so there's like just a total collapse of society in the book, and you can see how it could happen in the real world. It's not a far, it's
Well,
not like a, yeah, it's not a far reach.
it is absolutely not a far reach at all. I think everybody's favorite example of this is, in more recent times, is Zimbabwe.
Yeah,
It's a really good example. Venezuela is another one which is often cited. But um, very few people, I think, go to the trouble. It's easy to just criticize a few individuals. Say, oh, it was so and so's government that did this. It's not that simple. It is obviously, in many cases, it is politically or political system motivated,
yeah,
and it is these. Um, what is an appropriate way to describe this? There are these, let's say, fantasies of political systems that this time around we know how to make it work,
yeah,
despite the numerous examples in the past where it didn't work. But anyway, back to the book, it then kind of culminates in this very famous or important speech.
the 3 hour John Galt speech.
Correct.
It felt like
Which,
longer than 3 hours when I was reading it.
yeah. So there's obviously a hell of a lot to take out of that.
Yeah,
And if you kind of sit back and understand a little bit better, it was Ayn Rand's attempt to provide a summary of her philosophy, objectivism.
yeah,
And you can go and take the speech and look for the important elements
yeah.
of objectivism. So I asked our friend ChatGPT to summarize it for me and kind of give me the main takeout points.
Yes,
And it was quite interesting how it was summarized. Um, shall I quickly
yes,
run through them?
yes, I'm very curious.
Well, the first one is individualism and and rational self-interest.
Yeah,
And that's the cornerstone of it. In other words, live life for your own sake. And that's where the selfishness comes in. Um, and he very specifically mentions there that the highest virtue is rational self-interest, and that man's purpose or moral purpose is to live his life for his own happiness.
Yeah.
Which can obviously be so misconstrued.
As not caring about anything or anyone else.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. But we just kind of discussed how somebody whose self-interest is to build a business and drive forward new technology, etc., has all of these massive benefits, not only for the workers but for society and the world at large, in terms of the benefits that it brings to them. But I think it's also very important to note the use of the phrase rational self-interest. And that kind of leads to point number 2, is that reason is the only absolute. So reason is the only means of understanding reality and making proper decisions. Logic and evidence must be the basis of decision making, not faith or feelings.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think if we just focus on the last, 3 years or so, how often have you heard the feelings part? Why feeling?
Yeah.
Anyway, so reason, as opposed to faith or feelings.
Yeah.
It's extremely important, and throughout the book, and the struggles, etc., you can hear that in a number of places where that's being mentioned, the lack of reasoning, the not focusing on the logic and evidence.
Yeah.
When they make decisions, especially when it comes to government making these decisions, to try and appease the electorate,
There's a very good example of that in the book, where a government official is on one of the Tagot trains and has to be somewhere at a certain time, but he left it really late to get there in time. And he convinces, because he's a government official and people have to listen to him, he says it doesn't matter what you have to do, you have to get me there on time, and they have to decide whether to risk potentially killing
Correct.
one of the passengers on board, or defying this government official and or losing their jobs and getting into trouble. And it's this completely unreasonable decision that people have to make. In this context, they have very little way of saying no to a government official. So, yeah.
Correct. And then the third main point of the speech is the virtue of productivity. The mind in human survival, the mind of an individual has played a critical part in our survival, as it still does, and the necessity of productive work that goes along with that. So unlike animals, which does not have the ability to reason and heavily relies on instinct to go from generation to generation to generation, man has the ability to use his mind and to drive progress and to improve his own lot and the lot of others through that use of the mind, of rationality. So creators and producers' achievements are a result of independent thinking and effort. Then the fourth one is the evil of coercion and the necessity of laissez-faire capitalism.
Okay. Describe that
So
one.
throughout the book and throughout everything that I've
Yeah.
read about Ayn Rand is very much against any form of coercion. And in fact, she says that any form of coercion is immoral.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that is coercing somebody to come and work for you, coercing somebody to fight the war on your behalf, coercing somebody to come and protest, picket, loot, burn down cities in France, burn trucks of competitors, which is currently happening here in South Africa. 2 incidences in the last 24 hours of trucks being set alight. Anyway, so any form of coercion is immoral.
Mm-hmm.
Everything must be because of free will. And then the necessity of laissez-faire capitalism. Now, initially I couldn't understand why she continuously adds the laissez-faire part and not. So laissez-faire capitalism is a concept that comes from the 18th century. Couple of French dudes, I think, came up with the concept and so on. But it basically means capitalism with no government intervention. Because if we think about what is happening in the world at the moment, there are so many countries and nations that will say that they are capitalist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they follow capitalist principles. But if you look at the amount of government intervention, it is staggering.
Yeah.
Okay. So anytime government gets starts interfering, you can see that leads to more regulation, more laws, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a hindrance.
Yeah. Makes it difficult for a
So,
business to operate under too many restrictions.
yeah, absolutely. You know, and look, there are so many things that we can say about that. But so basically, the point that he's trying to make is that laissez-faire capitalism is the only moral system as it respects individual rights and freedom. And that is true. If you do not coerce, if you allow people to work for who they want to work, to do the kind of jobs that they want to do, it protects their individual rights and their freedom.
Yeah.
And then the fifth one is the sanction of the victim, in inverted commas. There is the idea that good, productive people support their own oppressors by accepting guilt and blame.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That is such a powerful sentence. And, again, how often have we seen that?
Or by accepting the rules and restrictions that are placed on them. I mean,
Correct.
by going along with it and not fighting them, they're accepting them. That's,
Yes.
even if they don't
Did,
agree with them.
did you see the most recent absolutely catastrophic example of that?
I'm not sure.
Ben and Jerry's.
Oh,
Have you heard of Ben and Jerry's?
yes, the ice cream.
Yeah. Yes, Ben and Jerry's ice cream, the two founders, Ben and Jerry, who obviously sold to Unilever.
Mm-hmm.
They said that they feel that all land should be given back to Native Americans
Mm-hmm.
because they stole it from them.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a Native American chief that said, okay, cool, thank you very much. Your factory is built on my ancestral land.
Mm-hmm.
So what next, you know? I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous, this whole guilt and shame thing that is being tried to put on people for uh, things that happened so far back in history. And yet the world is, I mean, so glad to just accept, embrace that guilt and blame. I mean, lest we not forget that Coca-Cola, I don't know if they're still running these internal seminars or courses or whatever, how to be less white.
I haven't heard
So,
of that.
oh, you haven't? I
Mm-mm.
know it was a big thing. It was probably towards the end, the middle or the end of 2020. Yeah, seriously. You have to go and attend some kind of session if you were employed by Coca-Cola, how to be less white.
Okay. It's an interesting title for the seminar.
But I mean, this is exactly the um, kind of things that people are embracing, and kind of speaks to this point that he was making here is if you accept these things, then you are actually supporting the oppressors. Let's not bullshit. They are oppressors. Anybody who wants to take something from you that they did not earn, did not work for, did not pay for, are oppressors.
Yeah.
And organizations, whether they are companies or governments that accept that and tolerate that, are supporting the oppressors. Anyway, um, furthermore, that point urges people to reject the role of the victim and to withdraw their sanction from an exploitable society, which is exactly what happened in the
Yeah.
in the novel. This is people just withdrew their sanction, their expertise, their knowledge, etc., withdrew that um, from society.
Which is catastrophic for society. Uh,
Unless you get to the other side.
yeah, but I mean that's a
It
complete
is
collapse of society and of any kind of furthering or innovation, or if you lose
correct.
the great minds and the industrious people, society cannot survive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, you can talk about some of these countries where we've seen it happen in fairly recent times and so on, and the so-called brain drain, which is not a very good description of what happens, but the brain drain being that the smartest people who can get out, they leave.
Yeah,
They go somewhere else and they go be productive there.
yeah,
Um, they are, yeah, again, there are more than enough examples, real life examples, to show that, as it plays out in the book, so it also plays out in real life.
yeah.
And then the second last point is the mind and body dichotomy. So this is one that I couldn't really remember, and I had to go familiarize myself a little bit with that. But basically, it says it repudiates the dichotomy between mind and body, which is often found in morals and faith, in terms of modern moral thinking and faith. So, in other words, claims that what is good for the mind is good for the body, and that the intellectual are not inherently opposed, but it is complementary. I think the main point, if I understand it correctly, is again that kind of referring back to reason and logic and evidence, as opposed to faith and feelings. So you you can't separate the mind and the body.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's probably a little bit more digging or rereading what he says in the speech about that. And then the last one is moral judgment, that moral judgment is absolutely necessary. Um, Acknowledge the moral and immoral in society. And we're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
We are largely not allowed to do that unless we piggyback onto what somebody somewhere decided is moral and immoral. An individual shouldn't refusing to call out evil is a form of tacit support.
Yeah, there was a line in the book from the John Galt speech where he says something about not having an opinion or a thought on something is more evil than thinking one way or the other. The kind of
Correct.
being on the
Correct.
fence or in the middle or not having any kind of thoughts of your own is the most evil thing that you can do.
Yeah. So look, it is such an important speech, and I think it's something that is obviously worth reading again and so on, and kind of digging into what her thoughts were on some of these things, which is obviously why I'm busy reading the Selfishness book to better understand that and better comprehend that and so on. But I think it is definitely something that we can all learn from, whether you agree 100% with her philosophy or not. And I honestly cannot think of another time in history since this book was written that it was more applicable than it is now,
Yeah.
in terms of all the turmoil that we kind of see around us.
Yeah.
Your thoughts, did it change your views in any way?
It probably aligned to a lot of my views already, but there were definitely some things that gave me pause to think and consider in a different way. Yeah. So the one thing that we had mentioned previously was the Robin Hood. Was Robin Hood really the bad guy? I mean, was the Sheriff of Nottingham not the bad guy? I don't know if it's the best example because the Sheriff of Nottingham wasn't earning his wealth in a fair, reasonable way. I think he was also stealing from people in order to be a wealthy man. But the concept of Robin Hood just as being someone who steals from the rich to give to the poor, that as a concept is not virtuous, is not a good, that doesn't make him a good guy.
Yeah.
Because that thing goes back to that thing that I'll say about the motor corporation that was trying to evenly distribute the wealth based on, or not evenly distribute the wealth based on who has the most need, and then who decides who has the most need and what right do they have to that, what have they done in exchange for it. I think it's that concept that everything in life is an exchange, and it should be. It should, even relationships, even everything should be an exchange. You don't go into something completely selflessly, and I think that's kind of the point, is that selflessness is not a virtue.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a recipe for disaster.
There needs to be an exchange.
Yeah.
And sometimes that exchange is that I feel good about myself. Maybe I'll donate to a charity and that makes me feel good. And that is the exchange. There is something, you're doing something,
correct,
you're getting something from it. It's not completely selfless. Donating to charity is not a selfless act.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Somebody mentioned to me the other day a quote, and I forget who originally said it, but basically it says that my relationship with you has absolutely nothing to do with you. And your relationship
Yeah.
with me has absolutely nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
And, the first time that you hear that, it sounds like, well, wait, that's wrong. It can't be. But then if you think about it from that point of, if you embrace moral or rational self-interest,
Yeah.
then it does make sense.
Yeah. Actually, it makes friendships more meaningful if you know that they are your
Correct.
friend because they are getting something out of it. There's
Exactly.
it makes relationships with people a lot more meaningful to understand that you're both getting something
Correct.
out of it, and that's the point. It's not meant to be I love you just because I
Exactly.
love you. There's yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And isn't it liberating that if you are in a relationship with somebody and if you know that your partner made you a cup of tea because he wanted to make you a cup of tea, not because he thinks that that is the right thing to do
Yeah.
to, make you happy or whatever. And vice versa, whatever you do and whatever you give in a relationship, whether it is friendship, family, work,
Mm-hmm.
society, etc., it makes for a hell of a lot healthier relationships.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I really try to embrace this rational self-interest concept.
Yeah, I like it too, and I'm exploring it a lot myself. I'm very excited to read The Virtues of Selfishness. I like the way Ayn Rand talks and expresses herself and explains things, and I can relate to it and I can understand it. So, um, yeah, I thank you for the suggestion. I really enjoyed the book,
You're
and I
welcome.
will read more of Ayn Rand. Um, and yeah, I quite like actually talking about a book. I think we should do this a bit more regularly. Pick a book that we've both read and are interested in, and have a little chat about it. Um,
Okay.
and yeah, thank you. This has been a really interesting chat.
Yeah, interesting. And lots to learn.
Lots to learn. If you can get through this thick book, I recommend it to anyone who's interested in these concepts.
There's a lot of people that suggest that one should first read Fountainhead before taking on Atlas
I
Shrugged.
haven't read Fountainhead, so I can't comment on that. But I found Atlas Shrugged to be a page turner. I think you had used those words when you
Mm,
suggested that I read it. I couldn't put it down. I was really excited to get through it all. Um, it wasn't a difficult read, even though it looks quite overwhelming when you see how thick it is and how small the text is. But yeah, it was really fun and interesting, and I enjoyed it, and it was entertaining. It's a really good story as well.
excellent.
Mm.
And so I'll be keen to chat about the book that you're currently reading, seeing
Yes,
that
we
I
didn't say
haven't read
that
it yet.
on the podcast yet. I'm reading Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. Um, this is a really interesting biography because the biographer didn't reach out to Steve Jobs, which is often how these biographies get written. Steve Jobs went to Walter Isaacson and begged him to write this biography and gave him
Okay.
complete freedom. He said, I don't mind who you interview, I don't need to review the book before you publish it. Like, he gave him free, and he really wanted Walter Isaacson to write his book. So
Mm,
it's an interesting one where the Elon Musk one, for example, who was it? Ashley Vance hounded Elon Musk until he agreed to let him write the biography, and
okay.
Elon Musk had to have say in some of the things that were written. So yeah, it's just a different format kind of biography than I've read before, and I'm enjoying it so far. But yeah, I'm only a few chapters in.
Excellent. Excellent. I've only listened to podcasts where the book was discussed. So I haven't read it. I'll be really keen to hear some of the insights and things that you learned from that.
Cool. Until next time.
Thanks, Ali.
Thank you.